the rankings came out and, there wasn't a ton different. And to be quite honest with you, kind of what we expect. So the top 6 looked like they have for the better part of the last few weeks, outside of obviously Ohio State, who falls down after the loss to Michigan. So Georgia, Michigan, 1 and 2, Washington, 3, Florida State, 4, Oregon, 5, and then Ohio State slides down there to the 6th spot, just ahead of Texas and Alabama. Am I surprised at any of this? No, I'm not really surprised at any of this. A couple of things that I would just note. There was a chance, I thought, with that quality win Michigan had over Ohio State, they could, if the committee wanted to, jump to number 1. Didn't think that they had to. They could have, though, just from a resume standpoint. But they didn't, which is totally fine. Doesn't matter at all. Washington stays at 3, even though they had, let's face it, like a really rough time in the Apple Cup, needed that 4th down on their side of the 50, way backed up in their own territory in order to convert and then go down and get a field goal and win the game. Florida State wins in ugly fashion against Florida. Their fans are hell-bent on talking about the fact that they covered. I get it. They technically covered. That at no point felt like a game that they were covering in, which is fine. Oregon was dominant over Oregon State. Ohio State lost, and so that's where we kind of fall. I thought Oregon could have moved up to 4. I thought Ohio State could have even slid no worse than 5. Now, they didn't, so it is what it is. I think what's more interesting here is when we start to look at everything in totality, and then we start to play out scenarios moving forward, which we're going to do on this podcast. So this is not just going to be my reaction to the rankings, right? You've already heard the way that I feel about the rankings. I'm going to give you a couple of feelings about just the way the committee is made up. But let's take a look quickly at the entirety of the top 25 as the committee gave them to us. So as you take a look at the entirety of the top 25, here's what you'll see is that Texas is at 7. So they did not put Texas above Ohio State. Alabama is still at 8. Mizzou remains at 9 as the top ranked 10-2 team in the country. Penn State is 10th at 10-2. Ole Miss, OU, LSU, Louisville, Arizona at 15, Iowa at 16, Notre Dame 17, Oklahoma State, North Carolina State is 19, Oregon State's 20, Tennessee remains fairly high, in particular as it relates to where they would be in other polls, whether they're AP poll or a simulated BCS poll. So Tennessee is at 21, Tulane 22, Clemson 23, also much higher than they would be in other polls, and Liberty 24, Kansas State 25. All right, so let's take those outliers that I was just talking about. Okay, I think that the goal of this ranking should be to have some semblance of data accuracy is the way that I would put it. Okay, data accuracy. And when you're trying to get data accuracy, if any of you have taken a statistics class, which if any of you have been to college, then you have, or even through high school, then you have, you'll know that, you throw out the low and the high a lot of times when dealing with a set of numbers, so that you scrub the anomalies, and then you work with the data set that falls more in line with where the bell curve would have it, right? So where more of the data would sit. I just so happen to think that this particular committee is giving us a couple of anomalies that if we had more data entries for the college football playoff rankings, then some of those would get scrubbed out. I think Tennessee is one of those, and I think Clemson is one of those. And by the way, it is absolutely accurate when you look at, the teams that are most heavily rewarded by the committee as opposed to let's say a simulated BCS. Guess what the top 2 are? Tennessee and Clemson. Okay, Clemson by about 6 spots, Tennessee by, I believe, 4 spots. Those are the biggest anomalies that this committee is giving us. So in any normal data set, or if you're working with any data set, then those would be kind of scrubbed out. And what you would try to do if working with a set of data is minimize those anomalies so that the anomalies don't affect the answer. And yet, here we are with these committee rankings, and the anomaly is absolutely affecting what we've got in college football. So that leads me to kind of my first point, which is I just don't love the current committee makeup. And it's not this year or last year or the year before. It's just the way that we do it as a whole. The BCS had a much better ranking system, but we all hated that there was only 2 teams included in the national championship. So they didn't have the number of participants right. But they did a much better job in terms of the data, the actual ranking. So we threw that out when we also decided that like we need more participants. So we raised it by 2 participants, and then we took the number of data variables that we enter into the equation. We took it way down to 13, which just doesn't seem like a good idea. But lo and behold, that's where we're at. So when that happens, and when you lower the number of variables that you enter into the equation, guess what happens? You can have these anomalies get through, like Tennessee and Clemson. So then what does that do? Well, it affects everything going on up top, because now, boy, Georgia sure is going to get a backstop, even if they were to lose to Alabama. And Florida State all of a sudden gets like this Clemson nod with a top 25 win, when, let's face it, in a BCS system, they would not get credit for that top 25 win, which, let's just hold on to that point for a moment, because what I told you was that Clemson was a +6, okay, in terms of where the committee ranked them versus where the BCS would have had them. They're 23 here. They would have been about 29 in the BCS system. Now, should that be the end all? Because a lot of these resumes, we just look at them and you say 3 top 25 wins versus 2 top 25 wins. Well, what if this team that I was just talking about has a 3rd win that's like the 27th best team? Well, guess what? There's not much difference between 24 and 27. Let's be really honest. There's not much difference between 23 and 29. And yet we have this overinflated view of like top 25 win. Now, if you're telling me you beat a top 15 team versus a top 50 team, okay, now we've got a huge difference in that opponent and the strength of that opponent in terms of the win that you created for yourself. So you get what I'm talking about here. Lots of math, lots of data, okay? And yet we have this system where we don't have what I would consider enough variables to weed out the anomalies. And by the way, this is completely rational, totally rational. Any mathematician would tell you the exact same thing. So now what we have is a committee that's made up of mainly administrators. You've got a couple of retired coaches, 8 athletics administrators, 2 business leaders that were former football players, and a professor. So in the committee of 13, think about this. We've got 13 people deciding the fate of college football teams. Not one of those people is currently full-time in college football. Not one. Now, you could say that like there's a few college football experts, right? You got a couple of former coaches on there. Absolutely. I love it. I love it. A couple of former players. Good. I love that. 8 athletic administrators that have other jobs. The 2 former football players also have other jobs. How in the world can they really be an expert at something if they're not in it? Right? I think that's fair to ask. So we want them to parachute in, get given a set of data. Trust me, I've done this. I've gone down there to Texas and taken part in like the mock committee. And like they give you data, they give you specific instructions. They tell you this is not about the most deserving. This is about the 4 best. And yet here we are. Got the undefeateds at the top. Then you've got some 1-loss teams, and you've got some 2-loss teams. Path of least resistance. It's what they always do. And you're going to tell me so this committee, no full-time experts in college football. And you're going to tell me like you have to rank the 4 best teams, and you put Florida State above Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Alabama? Now, if you want to say Florida State is more deserving of those teams because they're undefeated, okay, then you can make that argument. But if you tell me that most deserving is not in the vernacular of the committee at all, not supposed to be, to their own accord, and that it's just supposed to be about the 4 best teams, you cannot tell me that Florida State with Tate Rodemaker is better than Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, or Alabama. You just can't. Like, it's, sorry. Now, could you say like, well, no, Florida State, the team is deserving of that spot. Okay. Well, that's fine. Now, is that what they're trying to do? I don't know. That's what they tell me, that's not what they're trying to do. And yet that's clearly what they are doing. So again, the inconsistencies reign. So what would I do? Well, I'm not just going to sit here and whine about it. I would tell you that I would fix it with more variables. I think that the committee, as made up with, administrators and business leaders, that's fine. We can keep that one. I think we should also have a panel of experts that are covering the sport, and that they should be a committee, and that the 2 polls would be equaled out together along with a computer poll. Again, just more variables, because the more variables you have, the more that you can tie in or rein in the outliers. That's all we're trying to do, because right now the outliers are going to affect everything. If you're telling me Florida State is getting credit for a whole nother top 25 win just because this committee of administrators put Clemson at 23 versus where the computers would actually put them in a much more, let's just say, nuanced and mathematically correct ranking like the BCS, well, now we've got a bit of a problem. So you see where I'm going with that. More variables. I think that we should have more variables.
Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.